Welcome to the Spitzen-Körper Thelema. In 1911, Aleister Crowley published what he titled Liber LXXI, a commentary on fragments allegedly extracted from Blavatsky's Book of the Golden Precepts, a text she had herself presented as an ancient Tibetan mystical teaching. What Crowley actually produced was something far more transgressive, a complete rewriting of theosophical doctrine through the lens of Hermetic esotericism, Vedantic philosophy, and his own developing magical system. This is not scholarship. It is an act of deliberate appropriation and radical reinterpretation. The historical moment matters. Blavatsky had died in 1891. Theosophy was fracturing into competing lineages. Crowley was consolidating his authority as a magician philosopher and founding his own initiatic order. By anchoring his commentary to Blavatsky's prestige while systematically redirecting her teachings toward his own cosmology, he was performing a coup d'état in Western esotericism. This fragment belongs to a very particular current, the marriage of theosophical monism with Hermetic operative magic, mediated through Hindu philosophy. It is the skeleton key to understanding how 20th-century Western occultism broke from the Victorian spiritualism that birthed it. The passage we encounter here is Crowley's gloss on the opening verses of the precepts, the preliminary instruction on the dangers of the lower ide, or magical powers, and the progressive dismantling of consciousness required to hear what he calls the voice of the silence, a state of non-dual awareness lying beneath and beyond all mental phenomena. What is remarkable is not that Crowley adopts this framework but how he weaponizes it. He does not soften Blavatsky's teachings. He hardens them. Every verse receives the commentary that pushes the student toward ontological vertigo, the deliberate dissolution of the self as the prerequisite for genuine magical knowledge. The tone is distinctly Crowleyan, erudite, sardonic, occasionally patronizing, and absolutely uncompromising. The intellectual lineage is crucial. Crowley was not inventing this synthesis from scratch. He inherited it from the Golden Dawn, from Blavatsky herself, from the entire 19th century occult revival that had grafted Hindu and Buddhist philosophy onto Western Hermetic frameworks. But where others had sought to harmonize or soften contradictions, Crowley pressed toward paradox. The text you are about to hear is studied with references to the equinox, his own magical journal, to Book 4 of Magic in Theory and Practice, and to what he calls the Yoga curriculum. He is not commenting on an ancient text. He is building a parallel corpus, a complete alternative philosophical architecture. Now, the reading. These instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower ide, magical powers. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Nothing less can satisfy than this motion in your orbit. It is important to reject any idea of which you may become possessed. Firstly, because of the wasting of energy, which should rather be concentrated on further advance, and secondly, because ideas are in many cases so seductive that they lead the unwary to forget altogether the real purpose of their endeavors. The student must be prepared for temptations of the most extraordinary subtlety, as the scriptures of the Christians mystically put it, in their queer but often illuminating jargon. The devil can disguise himself as an angel of light. A species of parenthesis is necessary thus early in this comment. One must warn the reader that he is going to swim in very deep waters. To begin with, it is assumed throughout that the student is already familiar with at least the elements of mysticism. True, you are supposed to be ignorant of the dangers of the lower ide, but there are really quite a lot of people, even in Boston, who do not know that there are any ide at all, low or high. However, one who has been assiduous with Book 4, by Frate Padurabo, should have no difficulty so far as a general comprehension of the subject matter of the book is concerned. Too ruddy a cheerfulness on the part of the assiduous one will however be premature. to say the least. For the fact is that this treatise does not contain an intelligible and coherent cosmogony. The unfortunate Lanu is in the position of a sea captain who is furnished with the most elaborate and detailed sailing instructions, but is not allowed to have the slightest idea of what port he is to make, still less given a chart of the ocean. One finds oneself accordingly in a sort of Child Roland to the Dark Tower came atmosphere. That poem of Browning owes much of its haunting charm to this very circumstance, that the reader is never told who Child Roland is, or why he wants to get to the Dark Tower, or what he expects to find when he does get there. There is a skillfully constructed atmosphere of giants, and ogres, and hunchbacks, and the rest of the apparatus of fairy tales, but there is no trace of the influence of Dekker in the style. Now this is really very irritating to anybody who happens to be seriously concerned to get to that tower. I remember, as a boy, what misery I suffered over this poem. Had Browning been alive, I think I would have sought him out, so seriously did I take the quest. The student of Blavatsky is equally handicapped. Fortunately, Book 4, Part 3, comes to the rescue once more with a rough sketch of the universe as it is conceived by those who know it, and a regular investigation of that book, and the companion volumes ordered in the curriculum of the UA, fortified by steady persistence in practical personal exploration, will enable this voice of the silence to become a serious guide in some of the subtler obscurities which weigh upon the eyelids of the seeker. He who would hear the voice of Nada, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of dharana, concentrated thought. The voice of Nada is very soon heard by the beginner, especially during the practice of pranayama, control of breath force. At first it resembles distant surf, though in the Adept it is more like the twittering of innumerable nightingales, but this sound is premonitory, as it were, the veil of more distinct and articulate sounds which come later. It corresponds in hearing to that dark veil which is seen when the eyes are closed, although in this case a certain degree of progress is necessary before anything at all is heard. Having become indifferent to objects of perception, the pupil must seek out the Raja, king, of the senses, the thought producer, he who awakes illusion. The word indifferent here implies able to shut out. The Raja referred to is in that spot whence thoughts spring. He turns out ultimately to be Mayan, the great magician described in the third thigh. Let the student notice that in his early meditations, all his thoughts will be under the tamagana, the principle of inertia and darkness. When he has destroyed all those, he will be under the dominion of an entirely new set of the type of rajogana, the principle of activity, and so on. To the advanced student a simple ordinary thought, which seems little or nothing to the beginner, becomes a great and terrible fountain of iniquity, and the higher he goes, up to a certain point, the point of definitive victory, the more that is the case. The beginner can think, "It is 10 o'clock," and dismiss the thought. To the mind of the adept this sentence will awaken all its possible correspondences, all the reflections he has ever made on time, as also accidental sympathetics like Mr. Whistler's essay, and if he is sufficiently far advanced, all these thoughts in their hundreds and thousands diverging from the one thought, will again converge, and become the resultant of all those thoughts. He will get samadhi upon that original thought, and this will be a terrible enemy to his progress. The mind is the great slayer of the real. In the word mind we should include all phenomena of mind, including samadhi itself. Any phenomenon has causes and produces results, and all these things are below the real. By the real is here meant the nibbana dhatu. Let the disciple slay the slayer. 4. This is a corollary of verse 4. These texts may be interpreted in a quite elementary sense. It is of course the object of even the beginner to suppress mind and all its manifestations, but only as he advances will he discover what mind means. when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams. This is a somewhat elementary result. Concentration on any subject leads soon enough to a sudden and overwhelming conviction that the object is unreal. The reason of this may perhaps be, speaking philosophically, that the object, whatever it is, has only a relative existence. When he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer. By the many are meant primarily noises which take place outside the student, and secondly, those which take place inside him. For example, the pulsation of the blood in the ears, and later the mystic sounds which are described in verse 40. Then only, not till then, shall he forsake the region of Asat, the false, to come unto the realm of Sat, the true. By Sat, the true, is meant a thing previous to the real referred to above. Sat itself is an illusion. Some schools of philosophy have a higher Asat, not being, which is beyond Sat, and consequently is to Shiva Darshana as Sat is to Atma Darshana. Nirvana is beyond both these. Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshly eyes be rendered blind to all illusion. By the harmony within is meant that state in which neither objects of sense, nor physiological sensations, nor emotions, can disturb the concentration of thought. Before the soul can hear, the image, man, has to become as deaf to roarings as to whispers, to cries of bellowing elephants as to the silvery buzzing of the golden firefly. In the text the image is explained as man, but it more properly refers to the consciousness of man, which consciousness is considered as being a reflection of the non-ego, or a creation of the ego, according to the school of philosophy to which the student may belong. Before the soul can comprehend and may remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united just as the form to which the clay is modeled, is first united with the potter's mind. Any actual object of the senses is considered as a precipitation of an ideal. Just as no existing triangle is a pure triangle, since it must be either equilateral, isosceles, or scalene, so every object is a miscarriage of an ideal. In the course of practice one concentrates upon a given thing, rejecting this outer appearance and arriving at that ideal, which of course will not in any way resemble any of the objects which are its incarnations. It is with this in view that the verse tells us that the soul must be united to the silent speaker. The words silent speaker may be considered as a hieroglyph of the same character as logos, or the ineffable name. For then the soul will hear and will remember. The word here alludes to the tradition that hearing is the organ of spirit, just as seeing is that of fire. The word remember might be explained as will attain to memory. Memory is the link between the atoms of consciousness, for each successive consciousness of man is a single phenomenon, and has no connection with any other. A looking glass knows nothing of the different people that look into it. It only reflects one at a time. The brain is however more like a sensitive plate, and memory is the faculty of bringing up into consciousness any picture required. As this occurs in the normal man with his own experiences, so it occurs in the adept with all experiences. This is one more reason for his identifying himself with others. And then to the inner ear will speak, the voice of the silence. And what follows must be regarded as the device of the poet, for of course the voice of the silence cannot be interpreted in words. What follows is only its utterance in respect of the path itself. If thy soul smiles while bathing in the sunlight of thy life, if thy soul sings within her chrysalis of flesh and matter, if thy soul weeps inside her castle of illusion, if thy soul struggles to break the silver thread that binds her to the master, know, O disciple, thy soul is of the earth. In this verse the student is exhorted to indifference to everything but his own progress. It does not mean the indifference of the man to the things around him, as it has often been so unworthily and wickedly interpreted. The indifference spoken of is a kind of inner indifference. Everything should be enjoyed to the full, but always with the reservation that the absence of the thing enjoyed shall not cause regret. This is too hard for the beginner, and in many cases it is necessary for him to abandon pleasures in order to prove to himself that he is indifferent to them, and it may be occasionally advisable even for the adept to do this now and again. Of course, during periods of actual concentration there is no time whatever for anything but the work itself, but to make even the mildest asceticism a rule of life is the gravest of errors, except perhaps that of regarding asceticism as a virtue. This latter always leads to spiritual pride, and spiritual pride is the principal quality of the brother of the left-hand path. Ascetic comes from the Greek askew, to work curiously, to adorn, to exercise, to train. The Latin ars is derived from this same word. Artist, in its finest sense of creative craftsman, is therefore the best translation. The word has degenerated under Puritan foulness. When to the world's turmoil thy budding soul lends ear, when to the roaring voice of the great illusion thy soul responds, when frightened at the sight of the hot tears of pain, when deafened by the cries of distress, thy soul withdraws like the shy turtle within the carapace of selfhood, learn, O disciple, of her silent God, thy soul is an unworthy shrine. This verse deals with an obstacle at a more advanced stage. It is again a warning not to shut one's self up in one's own universe. It is not by the exclusion of the non-ego that saintship is attained, but by its inclusion. Love is the law, love under will. When waxing stronger, thy soul glides forth from her secure retreat, and breaking loose from the protecting shrine, extends her silver thread and rushes onward. When beholding her image on the waves of space she whispers, "This is I, declare, O disciple, that thy soul is caught in the webs of delusion." An even more advanced instruction, but still connected with the question of the ego and the non-ego. The phenomenon described is perhaps Atma-darshana, which is still a delusion, in one sense still a delusion of personality, for although the ego is destroyed in the universe, and the universe in it, there is a distinct though exceedingly subtle tendency to sum up its experience as ego. This earth, disciple, is the hall of sorrow, wherein are set along the path of dire probations, traps to ensnare thy ego by the delusion called great heresy. This earth, O ignorant disciple, is but the dismal entrance leading to the twilight that precedes the valley of true light, that light which no wind can extinguish, that light which burns without a wick or fuel. Saith the great law, in order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up self to non-self, being to non-being, and then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. Aye, sweet is rest between the wings of that which is not born, nor dies, but is the orm throughout eternal ages. What Crowley is performing here, what he understands as his role, is not translation but transfiguration. The text ostensibly belongs to Blavatsky and, before her, to an imagined Tibetan lineage. But the voice that emerges from these commentaries is entirely Crowley's, precise, layered, seeded with references to his own system, and relentlessly dialectical. Consider the opening move. He begins with the injunction to reject magical powers, the ID, but not on grounds of ascetic virtue. Rather, because they distract from further advance. This is already a profound departure from theosophical ethics, which had often valued renunciation as an end in itself. Crowley reframes it as mere prudence, a matter of strategic focus. The magician does not reject powers because they are sinful. He ignores them because they are obstacles to penetrating the deeper strata of reality. This leads directly to the central claim: the mind is the great slayer of the real. This phrase is not original to Crowley, it echoes Blavatsky, but his interpretation of it is. For Crowley, the mind is not evil, it is, rather, a tool whose usefulness terminates at a specific threshold. All mental phenomena, he insists, including samadhi itself, the highest absorption recognized in Hindu practice, are still phenomena, still conditioned, still part of the phenomenal realm that produces and is produced by causation. The real he names as Nibbana-dhatu, the Buddhistic equivalent of ultimate emptiness. This is radical because it places even the most exalted states of consciousness on the near side of enlightenment. The magician's task is not to cultivate mind but to cultivate the capacity to see mind as a veil, then to pass through it. What mutated to produce this understanding is the 19th century marriage of Hindu Vedanta and Buddhist Mahayana philosophy with Western magical practice. The Theosophists had first performed this marriage. Crowley is now systematizing it, weaponizing it, turning it into a precise operative methodology. What it seeded was the entire corpus of 20th century Western ceremonial magic, the Golden Dawn system, the OTO, the Awakoma and every subsequent order that claimed to synthesize Eastern mysticism with Western Hermetic practice. The second major current running through this text concerns the problem of the ego and its transcendence. Verses 14 through 16 address what Crowley calls obstacles at more advanced stages. The student who still takes pleasure or pain at face value, who still recoils from suffering or clings to joy, has not yet begun the real work. But then comes a subtle trap. At a higher stage, the student may experience what Crowley terms Atmadarshana, a condition of self-realization in which the individual ego seems to merge with the universal consciousness. But this too, he insists, is a delusion. The tendency to sum up its experience as ego, to declare this is I even in states of non-dual awareness, is itself a trap. The instruction is profoundly non-gradualist. There is no stopping point short of complete annihilation of any sense of self whatsoever. This doctrine has no parallel in Victorian theosophy. It is pure Crowley, drawing on Advaita Vedanta but pressing it into territory even Vedanta itself had sometimes hedged. The implication is vast. Even mystical union, even cosmic consciousness, can be a mask for a more subtle egoism. Finally, observe how Crowley handles the ethical dimensions of the teaching. When the text warns that spiritual pride is the principal quality of the brother of the left-hand path, he does not recoil. Instead, he rehabilitates the word ascetic through etymology, tracing it back to Greek askew, meaning to work, to adorn, to train, and reasserts it as an ideal of craftsmanship rather than self-denial. This is characteristic. Crowley does not reject the language of virtue. He rewires it. The true ascetic is not the monastic renunciate but the magician who has mastered every faculty and sensation without judgment or aversion. The teaching that follows, then, is not passive renunciation but active indifference, a profound and costly accomplishment. Next, Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine. The Spitzen-Körper Thelema. If this archive serves you, support it on Patreon. Link in the description.